On Christmas Eve, two hungry girls challenged the snow just to survive one more day. Standing before a luxurious palace, they asked for food in exchange for music and dignity. They were met with laughter, turned into a joke in a hall where no one knew what pain was. But when they sang, the truth cut deeper than any mockery could ever dream. The wind cut Luna and Stella's faces like icy blades, making their cheeks burn until they were numb. The two 7-year-old girls walked through the streets of New York City huddled together, sharing what little warmth their frail bodies could still produce. Their torn, dirty clothes clung to their skin, soaked by the fine drizzle that had been falling for hours, turning every step into a painful effort. Luna felt her legs tremble, but she hid her weakness so as not to scare Stella, who had been crying softly for the last hour. For 3 days they hadn't eaten anything, but a few scraps found in the trash behind a bakery. And even then, they had to fight off a stray dog that growled at them before giving up on the pieces of moldy bread. "Stella, look," Luna whispered, pointing to an illuminated storefront where dolls dressed as Santa Claus waved mechanically. "Tomorrow is Christmas." Stella lifted her face, her green eyes, identical to her sister's, reflecting the colorful lights of the decorations. "Do you think Santa remembers kids who don't have a home?" she asked, her voice hoarse from coughing. Luna swallowed the lump that rose in her throat. She had no answer to that question. Ever since they were abandoned at a group home and ran away after months of abuse, they had learned that the world cared very little for two girls with no name, no family, no place to go. Luna's stomach rumbled loudly, a sound that echoed in the silence of the empty street. Stella clutched her belly with both hands, trying to silence her own hunger, which gnawed at her insides like a fierce animal. They had to find food tonight, or they wouldn't have the strength to wake up the next day. "Let's go this way," Luna said, pulling Stella down an alley that led downtown. Maybe they would find a restaurant throwing out food, or someone willing to help on Christmas Eve. As they walked, the streets began to change. Cracked asphalt gave way to smooth, clean sidewalks. Broken streetlights were replaced by elegant lamps that bathed everything in a warm, golden light. The air carried different scents, expensive perfumes, fine food, fresh flowers. That's when they saw the building. It was as if a piece of heaven had fallen to earth. The white marble facade gleamed under powerful spotlights, and a red awning stretched from the entrance to the curb. Men in tuxedos and women in long gowns ascended a staircase covered by a red carpet, their jewels sparkling with every movement. "Luna," Stella tugged on her sister's sleeve. "They look like princes and princesses." Luna watched the scene, her heart pounding. Classical music escaped through the glass doors each time someone entered, along with a wave of warmth that made them shiver with longing. Inside there was light, food, heat, everything they hadn't had for months. "It's a theater," Luna murmured, reading the golden plaque fixed to the wall. The Grand Majestic Theater. A group of musicians was carrying instruments through a side entrance, and Luna felt something stir inside her chest. She and Stella knew how to sing. They had taught themselves, creating melodies to chase away the fear during cold nights in dark alleys. Stella had a voice as sweet as honey, and Luna could harmonize with any song she heard for the first time. "Stella," Luna said, her voice trembling with nervousness and hope, "what if we asked to sing in there, just for a plate of food?" Stella's eyes widened in fear. "But we can't go in there." "Luna, look how dirty we are, they'll laugh at us." "Let them laugh," Luna replied. "But if we don't even try, we'll go to sleep hungry again. And tomorrow, too." The two stood on the sidewalk, watching the commotion. Every person who passed them averted their gaze, as if their presence sullied the atmosphere. Some women covered their noses as they walked by, and one man in a suit even muttered something about allowing beggars in this area. Luna felt anger burn in her chest, but she swallowed her pride. Pride didn't fill your stomach, pride didn't warm your body. Pride wouldn't save Stella's life, who was already so weak she could barely stand. "Let's try," Luna said, taking her sister's hand. "Together." Stella nodded, trusting her sister as she always did. Since they were little, Luna was the one who made the tough decisions, who faced the dangers first. And Stella was the one who calmed Luna when anger or despair took over. They walked slowly toward the main entrance. The security guards saw them approach and immediately moved to block their path, but Luna didn't back down. "Please," she said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "We know how to sing. We can sing for you in exchange for a plate of food, anything." The taller guard laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air. "Sing? You two?" "We sing well," Stella insisted, finding courage in her sister's determination. "Our mother taught us before," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Other guards approached, drawn by the unusual situation. Some of the guests also stopped to watch, whispering among themselves with ironic smiles on their faces. "Little songbirds," said a woman in a blue dress, laughing behind her fan. "How charming." "Let them in," said a grey-haired man, clearly amused. "It'll be interesting to see what these two can do." Luna's stomach churned, but not from hunger this time. There was something cruel in the smiles of those people, something that made her want to run away. But Stella was shivering beside her, her lips already turning purple, and Luna knew they had no choice. The head of security spoke into his radio, and after a few seconds waved them in. "You can go through, but don't touch anything." The doors opened and a wave of heat enveloped them like an embrace. The lobby was more beautiful than any place Luna had ever imagined. Enormous chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, gilded mirrors reflected the lights in 1,000 directions, and a red carpet covered the marble floor. Elegant people chatted in small groups, holding crystal glasses filled with golden liquids that sparkled like liquid jewels. The air smelled of flowers, perfume, and delicious food that made Luna's mouth water instantly. But she also noticed the stares. Every person who saw them reacted the same way, surprise followed by disguised disgust and then amusement, as if their presence were an unexpected sideshow. "This way," the guard said, leading them through the lobby toward the main hall. "The stage is over there." Luna held Stella's hand tighter, feeling like they were walking into something much bigger than they had imagined. The main hall of the Grand Majestic Theatre opened before them like a cathedral of luxury and ostentation. Rows of red velvet seats stretched in a semicircle toward an imposing stage, where a black grand piano gleamed under the spotlights. The ceiling was a hand-painted masterpiece, with golden angels and cherubs that seemed to watch everything from above. Luna felt her legs go weak when she realized how many people were there. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, a sea of expressions ranging from curiosity and amusement to poorly concealed contempt. The murmur of conversations gradually ceased, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. "My God," whispered an elderly woman in the front row, raising a monocle to get a better look. "Those children are soaked and filthy. How did they let them in here?" "It's part of the show," laughed a portly man, adjusting his bow tie. "An immersive performance, perhaps very modern." Stella shrank beside Luna, trying to hide behind her sister. Her red hair, plastered to her face by the dampness, seemed even more conspicuous under the stage lights. Luna put her arm around her sister's shoulders, feeling how she trembled not just from the cold, but from fear. "Get on the stage," ordered the theatre director, a thin man with a waxed mustache who gestured dramatically. "Let's see what these little artists are capable of." The sarcasm in his voice cut the air like a razor. Some people in the audience laughed openly, and Luna felt her face burn with humiliation. But she kept walking, pulling Stella by the hand. Each step on the red carpet echoed in the tense silence of the theatre. When they reached the stage, the lights seemed even more intense. Luna blinked, trying to see the audience through the blinding glare. Hundreds of faces blurred before her eyes, but she could feel the weight of every stare, every cruel smile, every whispered comment. "So," said the director, striding across the stage with theatrical steps, "we have here two young artists who have come to bless us with their art in exchange for food, wasn't that it?" The audience erupted in laughter. The sound echoed off the theatre, walls ricocheting in the girl's ears like gunshots. Luna felt anger rise in her chest, but she swallowed her pride. Stella began to sob quietly. "What are your names?" asked a woman in the front row, clearly enjoying the situation. "I'm Luna," she answered, her voice trembling, "and this is Stella." "Luna and Stella," the director repeated, making an exaggerated bow. "Celestial names for our little stars. How fitting for Christmas Eve." More laughter cut through the air. Luna realized there was no kindness in this place, only cruelty disguised as entertainment. But Stella was by her side, trusting her, as always, and they desperately needed food. "You may begin whenever you're ready," the director said, gesturing toward the piano. "The audience is waiting." Luna looked at the enormous piano. She knew how to play a few simple songs she'd learned from watching a street pianist, but her hands were trembling and cold. Stella moved closer to her, whispering in her ear, "Luna, I'm scared. They're laughing at us." "I know," Luna murmured back, "but if we sing well, maybe they'll give us food. We just have to hold on for a little while." She walked to the piano and pressed a few keys. The sound echoed through the theater, pure and crystalline, momentarily silencing the laughter. Stella stood beside the piano, her arms crossed over her body to try to stop shaking. Luna began to play a simple melody, a song they had created together during a cold night in an alley when Stella was crying because she missed their mother. It was a song about hope, about two lost birds looking for a nest. Stella began to sing, her sweet voice cutting through the air like a ray of light in the darkness. For a moment the theater fell into absolute silence. The melody was simple, but it carried a purity that contrasted brutally with the atmosphere of luxury and falsehood. But before they could continue, a sudden movement at the back of the stage caught everyone's attention. Two theater employees appeared carrying a large bucket, with malicious grins on their faces. "Hold on," the director shouted, interrupting the music. "Before you continue, you need a proper bath to perform on our stage." Luna felt her heart plummet. She saw the bucket, saw the cruel smiles, saw the malicious anticipation in the audience. She tried to pull Stella away, but it was too late. The ice-cold water hit them both like a blow. The liquid ran down their already frozen bodies, drenching their torn clothes and making them shake violently. The shock was so intense that Luna couldn't even scream. She just stood there, dripping, feeling her dignity drain away with the water onto the polished wooden floor. The audience exploded. It was no longer discreet laughter, but loud guffaws, applause, whistles. Some people stood up to get a better view, others pointed and laughed. Camera flashes went off, capturing the moment of complete humiliation. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the audience. "What a magnificent performance!" "Now you're ready to sing," the director laughed, bowing to the applauding crowd. Stella collapsed into tears, her sobs echoing through the theater. Luna hugged her, trying to shield her with her own body. But she was shattered too. The humiliation burned hotter than the cold water, hotter than the hunger gnawing at her insides. It was in that moment of absolute despair that a powerful voice cut through the collective laughter like a sword. "Stop!" The entire theater fell silent instantly. Firm footsteps echoed down the center aisle, and every head turned to see who dared to interrupt the spectacle. A tall man with graying hair and an impeccable suit was walking toward the stage with a furious expression. It was Edward Stanton, 52 years old, owner of one of the largest entertainment companies in the country and the main benefactor of the Grand Majestic Theatre. When he spoke, everyone listened, and at that moment his voice carried a rage no one had ever seen. "What do you think you're doing?" he roared, striding onto the stage. "Humiliating children in my theatre." The director turned pale, stammering an attempt at an explanation, but Edward wouldn't listen. His eyes were fixed on the two drenched girls, and something in his face changed completely. The anger gave way to an expression of profound shock, as if he had seen a ghost. The wet red hair, the green eyes shining with tears, the delicate features. Edward felt the world spin around him. Edward took off his Italian wool coat and draped it over the girls' shoulders, covering their trembling bodies. His hands shook as he touched Luna's wet red hair, and for an instant, his face contorted in an expression of deep pain that no one in the audience could understand. "Someone get towels," he ordered, his voice sounding hoarse and controlled. "And dry clothes. Now." The theatre director tried to approach, babbling nervous apologies, but Edward cut him off with a glacial stare that made the man back away 3 steps. "You're fired," Edward said simply. Get out of my theatre." "Mr. Stanton, please, let me explain," the director began, but Edward had already turned to the girls, completely ignoring his presence. Stella was still crying silently, clinging to Luna's arm, who looked at Edward with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. They didn't understand why this elegant man was defending them, but they knew he was different from the others. "What are your names?" Edward asked, crouching down to their level. His voice was now gentle, almost a whisper. "Luna," the girl replied, still cautious. "And she's Stella." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, as if the words had physically struck him. When he opened them again, tears were streaming down his face. And what was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice breaking. Luna hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her mother, so long she had almost forgotten how good it felt to talk about her. "Carmen," Luna whispered. "Carmen Miller." The name hit Edward like a lightning bolt. He stood up abruptly, staggering backward, a hand on his chest as if he couldn't breathe. The audience murmured in confusion, not understanding what was happening. But Edward no longer heard anything but the echo of that name resonating in his mind. Carmen, the singer with the angelic voice he had met 8 years ago. The humble woman who sang in the parks for a few dollars, but who had more talent in her little finger than all the famous artists he had ever hired. The woman he had fallen madly in love with, but who had disappeared from his life without explanation. Where is Carmen now?" Edward asked, trying to control his voice. Luna looked down, and Stella began to cry harder. The answer came as a whisper laden with pain. "She went away a long time ago," Luna said, "when we were little." Edward felt his legs weaken. Carmen had children, twins, and he never knew. For all these years, while he had searched for her desperately, she had 2 little girls who needed her, 2 little girls who grew up on the streets, alone and abandoned. "Mr. Stanton," murmured his personal assistant Maria, a woman of 40 who had rushed over with towels and clean clothes. "What's going on?" Edward didn't answer. He was lost in painful memories, remembering Carmen singing to him in the small apartment he had rented for her, her delicate hands holding his as they planned a future together. A future that never happened. "Where are you living?" Edward asked the girls, forcing himself back to the present. "On the street," Luna answered simply, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "On the street," Edward repeated, shocked. "For how long?" "Forever," Stella said, finding the courage to speak. "We left the group home when they started hitting us too much." Edward felt a rage boil in his chest, rage at himself for not having looked harder, for not having insisted when Carmen disappeared. Rage at the world that allowed 2 innocent children to live on the streets while he slept in his comfortable mansion. "That ends today," he said, more to himself than to the girls. "Maria, call the driver, we're going home." "Mr. Stanton," Maria whispered, pulling him aside. "With all due respect, you don't know these children. You can't just take them home based on a coincidence of names." Edward looked at Maria with an expression she had never seen before. There was pain, yes, but also a steely determination that allowed no argument. "It's not a coincidence," he said quietly. "Look at them, Maria. Look closely at their faces." Maria looked at Luna and Stella, who were being helped by staff to dry themselves with the towels. For the first time she noticed their delicate features, their expressive green eyes, the shape of their faces. There was something familiar about them, something she couldn't quite place. "They have Carmen's eyes," Edward continued, his voice choked with emotion. "The same smile when they're not scared, the same red hair. They're her daughters, Maria. I'm sure of it." The audience had gradually dispersed, embarrassed by the unexpected drama unfolding on stage. A few curious onlookers remained, whispering speculations about the girl's identity and the millionaire's strange behavior. Edward approached Luna and Stella again, who were now a little drier and warmer, but still shivering from cold and nerves. "Girls," he said gently, "do you have a place to sleep tonight?" Luna shook her head. Normally she would have lied, made up some story to not seem completely helpless, but there was something in this man's eyes that made her feel she could trust him. "Then come with me," Edward said. "You'll sleep in a warm bed, take a hot bath, and eat anything you want." Stella looked at Luna for guidance. Luna studied Edward's face for a long moment, trying to detect any sign of a lie or ill intent. But all she saw was a deep sadness and a genuine desire to help them. "Why do you want to help us?" Luna asked directly. Edward smiled for the first time since he'd seen them, a sad but sincere smile. "Because," he said, "you remind me of someone very special I knew a long time ago, someone I should have protected better." He held out both his hands to them. Luna hesitated for only a second before taking one. Stella, seeing that her sister trusted the man, took the other. "Let's go home," Edward said, and for the first time in years, the word home had a real meaning for Luna and for Stella. As they left the theatre, Edward looked back one last time, seeing the stage where everything had changed. There, in that place of luxury and cruelty, he had found a second chance. A chance to do what he couldn't do for Carmen, protect her daughters. Because now he was sure. These girls were Carmen's daughters, and that meant that, in some inexplicable way, they were also part of his own story. A part he had lost, but that fate was returning to him on a Christmas Eve he would never forget. Edward's car was waiting for them at the theatre entrance, his longtime driver, Robert, a man of 60, holding the door open with a professional but curious expression. Edward helped the girls into the luxurious vehicle, noticing how they looked around in amazement. "Home, Robert," Edward said, settling into the seat beside the girls. As the car glided silently through the streets of New York, Edward watched Luna and Stella, who were pressed against each other, still processing everything that had happened on this extraordinary night. Edward's mansion rose before them like a castle from a fairy tale, 3 stories of classic architecture, perfectly manicured gardens, and an illuminated fountain in the center of the front courtyard. Luna and Stella got out of the car with slow movements, still not believing that this place would be their shelter, even for one night. "Oh my gosh," Stella whispered, grabbing Luna's arm. "It's bigger than the whole group home." Edward noted the reference to the group home and felt his heart ache. How many nights had these girls spent in cold, impersonal institutions, dreaming of a real home? The front door opened before they even reached it. A woman of about 50, with her hair in an elegant bun and a pristine apron, appeared on the threshold. It was Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper for over 15 years. "Mr. Edward," she said, but stopped abruptly when she saw the 2 girls. Her eyes widened, not with disapproval, but with genuine surprise. "Oh my goodness." "Peterson, these are Luna and Stella," Edward said, placing his hands protectively on the girls' shoulders. "They'll be staying with us. Please prepare the guest room with 2 beds, clean clothes, and a hot bath." "Yes, sir," Mrs. Peterson replied, but her gaze remained fixed on the girls' faces, as if she was seeing ghosts. They entered the main hall, where a crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling decorated with frescoes. The marble floor reflected the golden lights, and a curved staircase led to the 2nd floor. Luna and Stella walked close together, their footsteps echoing in the immense space. "You must be hungry," Edward said, leading them toward the dining room. "Mrs. Peterson can make you anything you want." "Anything at all?" Stella asked shyly, her voice small in the grand room. "Anything," Edward confirmed, smiling. "What do you like to eat most?" Luna and Stella looked at each other. It had been so long since anyone had asked their preference, so long since they had any choice beyond what they found or what was offered to them. "Our mum used to make macaroni and cheese," Luna said softly. "She said it was our favorite." Edward felt a lump in his throat. Carmen had always cooked for him when they were together, simple dishes made with love. He remembered the smell of her cooking, the caring way she set the table. "Peterson," he said, his voice slightly choked, "could you make macaroni and cheese for the girls?" "Of course, Mr. Edward," Mrs. Peterson replied, but there was something in her voice, a restrained emotion. "I'll get right on it." As Mrs. Peterson headed to the kitchen, Edward took the girls to the library, a cozier room with leather armchairs and a lit fireplace. The walls were covered with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Do you know how to read?" Edward asked, sitting in an armchair across from them. "Yes," Luna answered. "Our mum taught us before." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Before what, Luna? Edward asked gently. Luna looked at Stella, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath before continuing. Before she got sick, Luna said, the words coming out with difficulty. She would get confused, forget things. Sometimes she didn't recognize us. Then one day the neighbors called some people from the government, and they took us to the group home. And Carmen? What happened to her? Edward asked, though he feared the answer. We don't know, Stella said, starting to cry. They said she went to a place where they could take care of her, but we never saw her again. Edward closed his eyes, trying to process the information. Carmen had gotten sick. Maybe that's why she had disappeared from his life so abruptly 8 years ago. It wasn't abandonment or disinterest, it was illness. Do you remember where you lived with her? Edward asked. It was a small house near the train station, Luna said. It had a garden where Mommy planted flowers. She said the flowers made the house prettier. Edward's heart raced. He knew that house. It was where Carmen lived when they met. He had been there many times, had helped her plant that garden. How had he never thought to look for her children? Mr. Edward, Mrs. Peterson appeared at the library door. Dinner is ready and may I speak with you in private? Edward stood up, sensing the urgency in the housekeeper's voice. Girls, stay here for a moment. We'll be right back, he said, following Mrs. Peterson into the hallway. Mr. Edward, Mrs. Peterson whispered as soon as they were out of earshot. I've seen those children before. What do you mean? Edward asked, confused. Mrs. Carmen brought them here once. A long time ago they were just toddlers. She was desperate, said she needed to speak with you urgently, but you had travelled to London. Edward felt the floor give way beneath him. Carmen had been to his house. She had brought the girls, and he wasn't there. When was this, Peterson? About 7 years ago, I think. The girls were about 2, beautiful as angels, just like they are now. Mrs. Carmen was very nervous, said she needed to tell you something very important. And what did you do? I offered for her to wait, but she said she couldn't, that she was afraid. She left a message saying she would come back when you returned from your trip. What message? Mrs. Peterson hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. She said the girls were your daughters, Mr. Edward, that they were born after you two separated, and she didn't know how to tell you. The world stopped for Edward. Mrs. Peterson's words echoed in his mind like thunder. Luna and Stella weren't just Carmen's daughters. They were his daughters too. He leaned against the wall, feeling his legs weaken. For 7 years, his own children had lived on the streets, enduring hunger, cold, and humiliation, while he lived in his mansion, oblivious to their existence. Why did you never tell me? He asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I tried, Mr. Edward, but when you came back from your trip, you were so busy with problems at the company. And after a few weeks, when I finally got a chance to talk, you said you wanted to forget Carmen forever, that it was a closed chapter of your life. Edward vaguely remembered. It had been right after he discovered Carmen had completely vanished, when he hired private investigators to find her, and they found no trace. He had been devastated, and told everyone he didn't want to hear her name again. Peterson, are you sure about what she said? Absolutely, Mr. Edward. And look at them. They have your eyes from when you were younger. The same shape of your face, there's no doubt. Edward returned to the library with trembling steps. Luna and Stella were exactly where he had left them, huddled together in a large armchair, looking nervously at the door. He knelt before them, his hands shaking as he held their small faces. Girls, he said, his voice breaking, there is something very important I need to tell you. Luna and Stella looked at him with a mix of anticipation and fear in their green eyes, eyes that Edward now recognized as being exactly like his own. Edward looked into Luna and Stella's green eyes, searching for the right words for a revelation that would change their lives forever. His hands trembled as he held their delicate faces, and for a moment he wondered if he should wait, if they were ready for such an impactful truth. Do you remember your mother talking about your father? He asked gently, deciding to start slowly. Luna's brow furrowed as she focused on the fragmented memories of her childhood. She said our dad was a good man, Luna murmured, that he didn't know we existed, but if he did, he would love us very much. And that maybe one day we would find him, Stella added, her voice small and hopeful. Edward felt tears stream down his face. Carmen had protected his image even when he wasn't there, even as she faced the responsibility of raising 2 daughters alone. "Girls," he said, taking a deep breath, "I knew your mother a long time ago. I loved Carmen more than anything in the world." Luna and Stella looked at each other, slowly processing his words. "You knew our mum?" Stella asked, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, we were very close, but one day she disappeared from my life and I never knew why. I spent years looking for her." Edward paused, gathering the courage to continue. "What I didn't know was that Carmen was pregnant when she disappeared, that she had 2 beautiful daughters, you 2. The silence that followed was deafening. Luna and Stella stared at Edward with growing confusion, trying to connect the pieces of information. "Does that mean—" Luna began but couldn't finish the sentence. "It means I'm your father," Edward said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are my daughters." Stella began to cry immediately, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of a child who had dreamed her whole life of finding her father and was now seeing that dream come true in the most unexpected way. Luna, on the other hand, remained silent for a long moment, her eyes studying Edward's face as if searching for lies or hidden intentions. Life on the streets had taught her to be wary, even when she desperately wanted to believe. "How can you be sure?" Luna finally asked. "Maybe it's just a coincidence." Edward smiled through his tears. Even at 7, Luna showed a maturity and caution that broke his heart. She had learned far too young that the world was a dangerous place where people didn't always tell the truth. "Mrs. Peterson remembers when Carmen brought you here as babies," Edward explained. "And besides that, you have my eyes the shape of my face. We can do a DNA test if you want, but I am absolutely certain." "DNA?" Stella asked, confused. "It's a test that proves if people are from the same family," Edward explained patiently. Luna continued to study his face, and Edward could see the exact moment she decided to trust him. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed her expression. "So we really have a dad," she whispered. "Yes," Edward confirmed, pulling them both into a tight hug. "And I am so sorry I wasn't with you all these years. If I had known—" "It wasn't your fault," Stella said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Mommy said you didn't know." They remained in the embrace for several minutes, 3 people who had found each other in the most unlikely way. Edward felt as if a part of himself that had been lost for years had finally come home. "Dad," Luna said experimentally, testing how the words sounded in her voice. Edward laughed through his tears, the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "Yes, honey," he replied. "Dad." Mrs. Peterson appeared discreetly at the door, dabbing her own eyes with a handkerchief. "Dinner is getting cold," she said softly, "and the girls need to eat." During dinner, Edward watched his daughters eat the macaroni and cheese with a hunger that went far beyond physical need. It was the hunger of children who had finally found a place where they belonged. "You're going to live here with me," Edward said as they ate. "This is your home now, forever." "Forever and ever?" Stella asked, still not quite believing it. "Forever," Edward promised. "You will never have to sleep on the street or go hungry again, I promise." After dinner, Mrs. Peterson took the girls for a warm bath while Edward stayed in the library, trying to process everything that had happened that day. In a matter of hours, his life had completely changed. He had left home that morning a lonely, wealthy man, and now he was the father of 2 7-year-old girls who needed everything: love, care, stability. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Richard Moore, his lawyer and longtime friend. "Edward, I heard about what happened at the theater," Richard said without preamble. "Is everything okay?" "How did you find out?" "Some people filmed it and posted it on social media. The video is going viral. You defending 2 street kids and then taking them home. The press is already speculating about who these girls are." Edward felt a knot in his stomach. He hadn't thought about the public repercussions of his actions. "Richard, they're my daughters," Edward said quietly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Your daughters? Edward, are you sure about this? Absolutely. They're Carmen Miller's daughters, the woman I searched for years. My God, Richard murmured. Edward, you need to be very careful. If this goes public without the proper legal prep, there could be serious complications. What kind of complications? Custody issues, for one. If these girls were in group homes, there could be legal paperwork involved. And if the press gets the story before you, have all your ducks in a row. Edward hadn't thought of that. In his euphoria of finding his daughters, he hadn't considered the legal and bureaucratic implications. What do I need to do? First, keep this under wraps until we sort out the paperwork. Second, we'll need official DNA tests. Third, I need to check the girls' legal status. If they were officially abandoned, if there are any adoption processes underway. Edward felt a pang of panic. What if someone tried to take Luna and Stella from him now that he had found them? What if they tried to take them from me? We'll do everything by the book so that doesn't happen. But Edward, until we get this sorted, be discreet. No interviews, no public statements. After hanging up, Edward went upstairs to check on the girls. He found them in the guest room, already wearing clean pajamas that Mrs. Peterson had provided. They were sitting on a huge bed, looking small and lost in the luxurious surroundings. "Dad," Luna said when he entered, and Edward smiled, hearing the word again. "It's weird sleeping in a bed this soft." "You'll get used to it," Edward said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Tomorrow we'll buy you new clothes, toys, books, anything you want." "And we'll stay together?" Stella asked anxiously. "Always together," Edward assured her. "You will never be separated again." He kissed each of them on the forehead and was leaving the room when Luna called out to him. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "what happened to our mom? Why did she get sick?" Edward stopped at the door, unsure how to answer. It was a question to which he also needed answers. 3 days had passed since the night at the theatre, and Edward woke to screams, coming from the girls' room. He ran down the hall, still in his pajamas, to find Luna holding Stella, who was crying desperately in the middle of a nightmare. "Don't leave me alone," Stella cried between sobs. "I won't be able to find Luna." "Stella, it's okay," Luna murmured, rocking her sister gently. "I'm right here. I'll always be right here." Edward entered the room slowly, not wanting to startle them. It was the 3rd night in a row that Stella had woken up with nightmares, and Luna was sleeping less and less, always on alert to take care of her sister. "Can I help?" he asked softly. Luna looked at him with tired eyes. "She always dreams that we get lost from each other. On the street, when we had to sleep in different spots, she was terrified." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, his heart breaking to see how much his daughters had suffered. 3 days in a comfortable house couldn't erase years of trauma and abandonment. "Stella," he said, reaching for the little girl, "you're safe now. No one is going to separate you." "But what if the men from the group home come get us?" Stella whispered, her green eyes still shining with tears. "That's not going to happen," Edward promised, though he knew the legal situation was still unresolved. After calming Stella, Edward went down to his office, where he found Mrs. Peterson preparing breakfast. The housekeeper noticed his worried expression. "Did the girls have nightmares again?" she asked. "Stella did. And Luna barely sleeps because she's watching over her," Edward replied, running his hands through his hair. "Peterson, do you remember anything else about when Carmen was here? Any detail could be important." Mrs. Peterson stopped arranging the cups, her face growing serious. "Mr. Edward, Mrs. Carmen seemed very frightened that day. She kept looking over her shoulder as if someone was following her." "Following her? Who?" "I don't know, but she mentioned something about people who wanted to take the girls from her. She said she was trying to hide them." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Hide them from whom?" "She didn't say specifically, but she talked about important men who didn't want the girls to exist." Before Edward could fully process this information, the doorbell rang. Through the window he saw an official government car parked in front of the house. "Peterson, take the girls to their room and don't let them come down until I call," Edward said quickly. He opened the door to find a middle-aged woman with a Child Protective Services badge and a man in a suit who identified himself as a social worker. "Mr. Stanton," said the woman, Dr. Patricia Wallace, "I'm here to investigate the situation of the children Luna and Stella Miller, who are listed as missing from official records." Edward felt the floor drop out from under him. "Missing? They ran away from a group home 6 months ago and have been sought after. We received an anonymous tip that you brought them to your home without legal authorization. They're my daughters," Edward said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Do you have documents to prove that?" the social worker asked, consulting a folder full of papers. "I'm arranging for DNA tests," Edward replied. "Until that is official, the children must return to the protective system," Dr. Wallace said. "It's standard procedure." "They are not going back to a group home," Edward said firmly. "They were abused there." "Mr. Stanton, I understand your concern, but there are protocols to follow. The children need psychological and medical evaluation before any decision on custody can be made." At that moment, Luna appeared at the top of the stairs, having ignored Mrs. Peterson's instructions. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Dad," she said in a trembling voice, "are they going to take us back?" The question echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Edward ran up the stairs and scooped Luna into his arms, feeling her tremble. "I won't let anyone take you," he murmured in her ear. Dr. Wallace came up the stairs as well, her expression professional but not without compassion. "Luna," she said gently, "no one wants to hurt you or Stella. We just want to make sure you're safe." "We're safe here," Luna said, clinging to Edward's neck. "This is our dad. Our mum said he was a good man." "You remember your mother?" Dr. Wallace asked, genuine interest in her voice. "Of course I remember. She sang to us every night. She said our dad would love us if he knew we existed." Edward felt tears in his eyes at his daughter's words. "Where is your mother now?" the social worker asked. Luna looked down. "She got confused and sick. The neighbors called people who took her away. We never saw her again." Dr. Wallace and the social worker exchanged significant glances. "Do you know their mother's full name?" Dr. Wallace asked Edward. "Carmen Miller," he replied. The woman quickly flipped through her papers, stopping at a specific page. "Carmen Miller was admitted 7 years ago to a state psychiatric institution with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia," she read in a low voice. "It states here that she passed away 3 years ago due to medical complications." The world stopped for Edward. Carmen was... No, that was impossible. For all these years he had searched for her, imagining she was alive somewhere. Luna, who had overheard the conversation, began to cry silently. "Mummy's gone?" she whispered. Edward couldn't answer. He just held her tighter, trying to absorb her pain as if it were his own. Stella appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her pajamas, sensing that something terrible was happening. "Why is everyone crying?" she asked, running to Edward and Luna. "The girls didn't know," Edward murmured to Dr. Wallace. "They thought their mother was still alive." Dr. Wallace watched the scene with a moved expression, a desperate man trying to protect 2 girls who had just discovered they were complete orphans. "Mr. Stanton," she said finally, "I'm giving you a 48-hour deadline to regularize the legal situation. If we don't have the DNA test results and the necessary documentation in 2 days, the children will have to come with us. And if the DNA confirms I'm their father, then we will begin the legal process for full custody, but that could take weeks or months." After the government officials left, Edward stood in the hall holding his daughters, all of them crying for the loss of Carmen and the fear of an uncertain future. "Dad," Luna said between sobs, "you won't let them take us, will you?" Edward looked into his daughter's green eyes, so much like Carmen's, and made the only promise he could. "I will fight for you with everything I have," he said, "but I need you to be brave and trust me, even if things get hard." That afternoon, while the girls slept, emotionally exhausted, Edward made dozens of calls, to his lawyer, to private labs, to contacts in the government. With each call, it became clearer that the battle for custody of his daughters would be far more complicated than he had imagined. And as he made those calls, one question wouldn't leave his mind. Who had made the anonymous tip? And why would someone want to separate him from the girls right now? The 48 hours seemed to fly by like minutes. Edward spent the entire night on the phone, using every contact he had to expedite the DNA testing process. At 6 in the morning, he finally managed to schedule the test for noon that same day, paying a fortune to have it processed on an urgent basis. Luna and Stella woke to find their father in his office, surrounded by papers and with deep, dark circles under his eyes. They had slept together in the same bed, clinging to each other, still trying to process the news about their mother. "Dad," Luna said hesitantly, "did you sleep?" Edward looked up from the documents, forcing a tired smile. "A little. Come here, girls." They approached, and Edward pulled them into a hug. He could feel their small bodies still trembling with anxiety and fear. "Today we're going to do that test I told you about," he explained. "It's just a little cheek swab, it doesn't hurt at all. And after that we'll prove to everyone that you're my daughters." "And then they can't take us away?" Stella asked, her voice still hoarse from crying. "They won't," Edward promised, though he knew that even with the DNA there would still be legal battles ahead. At 9 in the morning, Richard Moore arrived at the mansion with a briefcase full of documents and a worried expression. "Edward, we have a problem," he said, as soon as they were in the office. "I found out who made the anonymous tip." Edward felt his stomach clench. "Who?" "Your brother, August." The world stopped for Edward. August Stanton, 3 years younger, had always been envious of his business success. The two had fought years ago over their father's inheritance and had barely spoken since. "Why would August do this?" "He's claiming you kidnapped 2 children during an emotional crisis. He told the authorities you're not mentally stable enough to care for minors." Edward felt rage rise in his chest like lava. "That bastard—" "There's more," Richard continued gravely. "He's filed a legal petition claiming that, as your closest brother, he should have temporary custody of the girls until the situation is resolved." "What?" Edward shot up from his chair, knocking papers to the floor. "He doesn't even know the girls." "Edward, you need to calm down. August has a traditional family, a wife, 2 kids. In the eyes of the court, it might look like a more stable environment." Edward began pacing, his hands shaking with anger and desperation. "He's doing this to destroy me. He's always been jealous of my success." "Probably," Richard agreed. "But what matters now is how we fight this." Just then, Luna appeared at the office door, having overheard part of the conversation. "Dad," she said in a small voice, "is someone else trying to take us away?" Edward knelt to her level, holding her small hands. "Luna, there's a man who doesn't like me, and he's trying to cause trouble. But I won't let anyone separate you from me, I promise." "It's Uncle August," Luna said thoughtfully. "Mommy used to talk about him sometimes." Edward's eyes widened. "Carmen knew August?" "She said he came to our house once, when we were really little. He said mean things to her and told her to go away and never talk to you again." The world collapsed for Edward. August knew Carmen. He knew about the girls, and he had threatened Carmen to stay away from him. "Luna," Edward said in a trembling voice, "do you remember exactly what your mother said about this man?" "She said he told her that if she told you about us, he would make bad things happen to us. That's why she was afraid to look for you." Richard and Edward looked at each other, finally understanding the full extent of August's manipulation. He had deliberately separated Edward from Carmen and the girls, and now he was trying to use the children themselves as a weapon against his brother. "Richard," Edward said in an icy voice, "we are going to destroy my brother in court." At 11:30, Edward, Luna and Stella were on their way to the lab when the phone rang. It was Dr. Patricia Wallace from CPS. "Mr. Stanton, there's been a change of plans. We've received a court order for the girls to be temporarily handed over to Mr. August Stanton until the case is resolved." Edward nearly crashed the car. "That's impossible, I have rights." "Mr. Stanton, the order is from the judge. Mr. August presented evidence that you may pose a risk to the girls." "What evidence?" "Photographs of you at the theater, shouting and being aggressive. Old psychological reports from when you went through depression after your parents' death. And a recording of a conversation with your lawyer where you use violent language." Edward realized he had walked into a carefully planned trap. August had documented everything to use against him. "Dr. Wallace, these girls are my daughters. We're on our way to do the DNA test right now. The test can be done later. Right now, I need you to bring the girls to our office in 1 hour." Edward hung up the phone, his hands shaking. Luna and Stella, who had heard the conversation, were terrified. "Dad," Luna said, tears starting to fall, "are they going to give us to that mean man?" "No," Edward said with determination. "That is not going to happen." He made a sharp turn, changing direction. "Where are we going?" Stella asked. "To the airport," Edward replied. "We're going to take a trip for a few days until I sort this out." Richard, who was in the passenger seat, turned around, alarmed. "Edward, you can't run away with the girls. That would be kidnapping." "I'm not handing my daughters over to that psychopath," Edward roared. "He threatened them when they were babies. He separated them from me. I won't let him destroy them, too." "Edward, if you run now, you'll lose any chance of getting legal custody. You'll be considered a criminal." Edward drove faster and faster, his mind racing. He had enough money to leave the country with the girls, to start over somewhere else. But that would mean they could never come back, never have a normal life. "Dad," Luna said from the back seat, "you're scaring Stella." Edward looked in the rearview mirror and saw Stella crying silently, terrified by the situation. She had spent the first years of her life running and hiding. He couldn't do this to her again. Slowly he eased off the gas and pulled the car over to the shoulder. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he made the hardest decision of his life. "Richard," he said in a broken voice, "call Dr. Wallace. Tell her we're on our way back." "Dad?" Luna reached forward and took his hand. "How are you going to give us to him?" Edward turned to look at his daughters, memorizing every detail of their faces before they were taken from him. "I'm going to hand you over to the state," he said, tears streaming freely. "But it's temporary, I promise. I will fight in court and you will come back home." "What if he does bad things to us?" Stella asked, her voice a terrified whisper. Edward didn't have the courage to answer, because the truth was he didn't know if he could protect them, and for the first time since he'd found them, he felt that maybe it was too late to be the father they deserved. The Child Protective Services office felt like a makeshift courtroom. Edward sat in a hard chair, holding the hands of Luna and Stella, who trembled beside him. Across the room, August Stanton watched the scene with a satisfied smirk. August was physically similar to Edward, but there was a coldness in his eyes that had always set him apart. At 49, he had perfectly coiffed grey hair and wore an expensive suit that projected respectability. "Girls," Dr. Wallace said gently, "you're going to stay with your Uncle August for a few days while we sort out the legal situation." "We don't want to go with him," Luna said firmly, clinging to her father's arm. "We want to stay with our dad." August stood up and approached the girls with a forced smile. "Hello, Luna and Stella," he said in a syrupy voice. "I'm your Uncle August. You're going to love my house. I have 2 children your age." Stella hid behind Luna, who stared at August with suspicion. "You're the man who made our mommies scared," Luna accused him directly. August's smile faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "Your mother was confused, dear, sick. I was only trying to protect you." "You're lying," Luna said with a courage that surprised everyone in the room. Edward felt proud of his daughter, but also afraid. August was not a person who reacted well to confrontation, especially from a 7-year-old child. "Luna," August said, his voice growing colder, "children shouldn't speak to adults that way." Just then, the door opened and Mrs. Peterson rushed in, carrying a box of old papers. "Excuse me," she said, out of breath. "I need to speak with Mr. Edward urgently." "Doctor." Wallace frowned. "Ma'am, this is an official proceeding. There can be no interruptions." "It's about the girls," Mrs. Peterson insisted. "I found some of Mrs. Carmen's important things." Edward stood up. "Peterson, what did you find?" "When Mrs. Carmen came to your house years ago, she left a small purse behind. I kept it, thinking she'd come back for it. This morning I remembered and went to look for it in the storage room." August became visibly nervous. "This is irrelevant to the current process." Mrs. Peterson opened the box and pulled out a worn leather purse. Inside were photos, papers, and a small old tape recorder. "Mrs. Carmen left this," Mrs. Peterson said, handing the recorder to Edward. "She said it was important, that if anything happened to her, you needed to hear it." Edward took the device with trembling hands. "Does this still work?" "I tested it this morning. It works." August stepped forward quickly. "We can't accept evidence that hasn't been officially reviewed. This could be a fabrication." But Edward had already pressed play. Carmen's voice, faint but clear, filled the room. "Edward, if you're hearing this, it means something has happened to me. I need you to know the truth about our daughters and why I disappeared from your life." Everyone in the room fell silent. Luna and Stella stared at the recorder with wide eyes, hearing the voice of the mother they hadn't heard in years. The recording continued. "Your brother August came to our house when the girls were 2. He said he knew about them, and that if I told you, he would make sure we could never be together. He said he had fake proof that I was a prostitute and would use it to take the girls from me." August turned pale. "That's a lie. That woman was sick, paranoid. He said you had an important career and that the girls and I would be a scandal that would ruin everything." Carmen's voice continued. "He showed me fake photos, fake documents. I was scared, Edward. So scared of what he might do to our daughters." Edward looked at August with a rage he had never felt before. "You threatened Carmen. You separated me from my daughters. I protected you," August shouted, losing his composure. "That woman would have ruined your life, 2 bastard children from a street singer." The insult to his daughters was the last straw. Edward stood up and lunged toward August, but Richard held him back. The recording continued, with Carmen describing in detail August's threats, including the fake photographic evidence he had created, and his promise to use his connections to ensure she never saw her daughters again if she told Edward the truth. "That's why I disappeared," Carmen said on the tape. "I thought if I vanished completely, he would leave the girls alone. But then the illness came and I couldn't take care of them properly anymore. Forgive me, Edward, forgive me for not being strong enough to fight him." When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Dr. Wallace looked at August with an expression of horror and disgust. "Mr. August Stanton," she said in a controlled voice, "do you have anything to say about these accusations?" August tried to maintain his composure, but his nervousness was obvious. "It's the word of a dead, mentally unstable woman against mine," he said. "It proves nothing." Mrs. Peterson reached into the box again and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Carmen also left this," she said, handing the envelope to Edward. Inside were photographs. August entering the humble house where Carmen lived with the girls, documents with his forged signature, falsifying information about Carmen, and even a photo of him burning papers in his own backyard. "Carmen documented everything," Edward murmured, flipping through the photos. "She knew you would try to deny it." August saw he was cornered. His expression shifted from arrogance to desperation. "Edward, we're brothers," he said, trying one last gambit. "I was only trying to protect you. That woman was the mother of my children," Edward roared, "and you condemned them to live on the streets for years." "Doctor," Wallace stood up, her decision made. "Based on this evidence, Mr. August Stanton's petition is denied. Furthermore, I will be referring this case for criminal investigation for fraud, threats, and interference with parental rights." August was escorted out of the room by security, his plan completely unraveled. "As for Mr. Edward," Dr. Wallace continued, "considering the evidence presented and the testimony of the children themselves, I am authorizing temporary custody until the DNA tests are finalized." Edward fell to his knees and hugged Luna and Stella, who were crying with relief and happiness. "You're never leaving my side again," he promised through tears. Never again. 2 months later, the DNA results officially confirmed what everyone already knew. Luna and Stella were Edward Stanton's daughters. Full custody was granted in a simple ceremony, where the girls could finally call Edward Dad without fear of being separated from him. August was convicted for his actions and lost all rights to the family inheritance. More importantly, Luna and Stella never had to see him again. On Christmas morning, 1 year after that night at the theater, Edward woke to the sound of laughter coming from the living room. He found his daughters decorating a Christmas tree, softly singing the same song they had sung at the theater on the night that changed their lives. "Good morning, Dad," Luna said, running to hug him. "Good morning, Daddy," Stella echoed, joining the hug. Edward looked at the decorated tree, at the presents beneath it, at the genuine smiles on his daughters' faces, and knew that Carmen would be proud. Her girls had found their way home. Finally, they were where they always should have been, in the arms of someone who loved them unconditionally. Snow was falling outside, but inside the Stanton home there was only warmth, love, and the sweet music of a family reunited after so many years of forced separation. "Merry Christmas, girls," Edward said, kissing Luna and Stella on their foreheads. "Merry Christmas, Daddy," they replied in unison, and for the first time in their lives they truly believed that all their future Christmases would be just like this, with family, in safety, at home.